Good afternoon. Welcome to Carnegie for our Sioux Falls City Council information meeting. Great to see everybody here. Made it safe. It is a rather snowy afternoon out there. Want to encourage everybody that might be watching. It is now winter driving again, and to increase your following distances, slow down, and be careful and arrive safe. You're welcome. We have a rather robust agenda for this afternoon, so we're going to get started with our report from our Land Use Committee from Councillor Althing.
Thank you very much. We met on the 15th of October and discussed a number of items. First of all, we did some corrections and additions to the general condition for public improvement and some proposed corrections, I should say. That has to do with some engineering design standards and general conditions for the public improvement. Just some most of them were kind of minor pickups, if you will, of mistakes or things that needed to be changed that were pretty easy to do. This is supposed to be reviewed on an annual basis, and it is by the city, and then approved by City Council. It goes through IRAB and our committee. Ryan Johnson talked about sanitary sewers. Jeff Dunn talked about water mains. Brad Ludens reviewed the general conditions then, and we went through, talked a little bit about some other different things. Along with Shannon Verhey, talked about the potential changes to the right-of-way regulations. Then Jess Schmidt and Scott Wick from talked about the Sioux Empire Fair and what good years they've had the last 3 years, and some of the ways that we cooperate with the fair and helping them, and they help us at different times. I know our police are out there all the time training and driving and doing different things using the facility, and we compensate, but we make up for it in other ways that we can help them. So we congratulated Scott on the great turnaround that the fair has had, and told him to keep it up. It's a good thing. So no open discussion, and that would be it.
Questions for Councillor Althing on the Land Use Committee? All right. Councillor Anderson.
I guess I just want to comment on the Sioux Empire Fair and how they were a great partner during our ice storm also, by taking all the wood that they could in that northwest parking lot. And the city in kind then graveled that area, I think making it even a better parking lot and making it something that can be further utilized both by the city and the county. Good job.
Very good, valid points. Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Now to the part of our meeting where we will progress into our open discussion. Anybody have anything they'd like to bring to the council? Open discussion. Councillor Erpenbach.
Thank you. I just have a couple of things regarding the Homeless Advisory Board. I'm the City Council representative on that. Homeless Advisory Board, you'll remember, is a combination of city and county officials, and it really is an advisory position in terms of issues that are happening around those folks that are most in need in our community. A couple of things regarding Homeless Advisory Board. Just a reminder that our Thursday, November 7th, is a public policy morning. We are all invited, and I hope that you would make time to attend. We do have a national speaker coming in, and they will be talking about low-income housing and affordable housing, those sorts of issues that are really critical. They're things that we've been talking about for a period of years, but they continue to become more and more of a crisis situation, and so we're going to look at it not only from a national level, but how we might be more involved on the local level. And so I'd invite you to be part of that. Again, it's Wednesday, and if you need information about it, see me afterwards, and I'll talk with you about that. The other thing then is something that you are going to possibly see in the Argus Leader in the next few days. Came out of the Homeless Advisory Board met on Monday, and we've talked about this previously, and it's been in the news previously, but it came more to a head on Monday. The Criminal Justice Initiative that came out of the South Dakota legislature last spring moves folks faster out of the prison system and back into the community. And it's a money-saving move for the state, but it is going to put a burden on the local and county governments. And the conversation on Monday was You know, it went into effect the 1st of July. None of those folks have been moved out of prison yet, but that process is happening. And the word is that very likely most of those folks will be moved to Sioux Falls and to Rapid City because that's where the jobs are. They're not necessarily going to be sent back to where they came from, you know, smaller towns. And there are some dramatic concerns. Of course, the county, in their role in Human Services, has a far bigger hit than the city does. But we take it in terms of other, you know, our affordable housing initiatives, those programs that we're really involved with funding. You know, we do help with the Salvation Army warming house, those sorts of things. Everyone expects to be strapped. And at this point, all the numbers show increases in all of those service needs, increases in all of those folks that are living at Union Gospel, living at St. Francis, increases in people at the food bank, at the food pantry, increases everywhere. And now we're going to come from this other level and add to those numbers. So we spent some time on Monday kind of in the oh my gosh phase. And we are going to have a state person come and speak at the county commission meeting because the HAB board doesn't meet again now until January. But I'd invite you, I'll let you know when that's happening. But it's just going to be that time where we need them to say to us, this is the plan. And this is how we're funding it, or this is how you're funding it, or this is our expectations. At this point, there is no formal plan. It just is law that these folks are leaving prison early, and good luck is kind of the feeling that we're getting. And so that's, you're going to read about it more in the paper, and I just wanted you to hear that we are involved in it as a city because we're involved with the HAB, and we'll just do our best to work through it. I can certainly answer some questions. Jill Franken is here too, she's on that board. But again, we're just in that wait and see mode right now, but just so you know, that's what's coming down the pike.
Any questions for Councilor Erpenbach? Councilor Anderson.
Is it true that the state did allocate some money towards this? It's not a lot, but...
Yes, there is some money allocated toward it. My understanding is, and I'm, again, getting it second and third hand, about $250,000. It's not very much money, and some of the proposals are kind of odd. I mean, we're sort of hearing them anecdotally. You know, let's put 4 parolees in a motel room. Well, no, that's not going to work necessarily. But, you know, those are the kinds of things that we're hearing, and we're just hearing them in bits and pieces. So we're at a point where, as the governing bodies of these local organizations, we need to hear from the state. But yeah, it's a very small, compared to what it needs to be, very small amount of money.
Right. The hotel ideal is something that they utilize in North Dakota, where they actually go and lease a whole section of a hotel and house these former inmates in those. And I just don't see that working.
Well, yeah,
here.
exactly. And maybe it is something that would work, and maybe, you know, it's something we need to hear in more detail. But again, in South Dakota, we don't have it in a plan, and, you know, we're 5 months into the law went into effect the 1st of July, and we don't have a plan. You know, so.
One more question. Did the Homeless Advisory Board get any presentation from the Glory House? I know that they've been working on this with Stacy Teason for a while.
You know, not this week. We meet every couple of months, and I apologize, I am not at every single meeting. I'm not sure that we have, though. Okay. So that would be good to add to our agenda. But they also, I mean, that was part of the report the other day, is Glory House is full. You know, so.
But they do have expansion plans, or would like to, and there would have to be some city involvement on that.
Sure.
Due to 49th Street going through, there would be some extra property over there that could be utilized to expand the Glory House, and at least provide some housing for some of these people getting out.
Well, if I could, Mr. Chair, that's kind of the conversations we're going to have, is that, okay, what about this? You know, and well, that doesn't quite work, but what if we twisted it this way? And those are the conversations we haven't had, and the HAB was really feeling like we haven't been part of any of those conversations, yet we know those folks are coming down the pike and they're going to be here. We need to be able to say, yeah, well, you know what, there is going to be some land there. What can we do with that? Or whatever, you know, those conversations need to happen.
I have a question. Just curious, I guess, and I don't know if it matters or not, but when a person is released from the state pen, I mean, do they walk out the front door? Or are they given the option of bus ticket? You said most of them are going to settle in Sioux Falls or
My-
Rapid City?
My understanding, Mr. Chair, is that they get $50 and whatever clothing or belongings they had when they walked in.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And if I can continue on that, one of the reasons why they're going to be coming to like Sioux Falls, Aberdeen, Rapid City is because not only do we have the jobs, but we have the support utilities that these people are going to need, because some of them will be on parole and will have to have meetings with officers and things like that. So they're going to have to be housed in an area where they can utilize those supports.
You're right, exactly. And there isn't any funding to add the number of those folks to the county. I mean, so it's a big snowball, and I hate to be really negative. That's not who I am, but I'm fearful to a certain extent. And it's going to be one of those things where it's not our responsibility as the city. We're not in the human services business, but these folks are our citizens too, and so we have to think about how that's going to work. The other thing I would just say, if I could, is that if you want updates from the Homeless Advisory Board, it is on the Minnehaha County website, minnehahacounty.org, and there's all kinds of fun charts and things that if you're into the numbers and want to see really what those trends are. And like I said, they're all going up, but they are there, so.
Thank you for your work on that board. I know it can sometimes be trying and an interesting position.
It's
so.
depressing, yeah. I come out of it going, eh.
Yeah.
But, yeah, doing our best.
Any other city council open discussion? Councilor Jameson.
Just want to remind the body of the meeting tomorrow with Councilor Rolfing and Anderson and myself for the Transit Task Force at 3:30 here. Should be a great opportunity. There'll be 20 members from the community. It should be a great chance for a lot of community leaders to get involved in solving or working on our transit issues. So all the council is welcome. Our intentions and hopes are that we'll have something wrapped up within or so 6 months that we can, some kind of a plan we can present to the council to plug into the budget. So
That's at 3 o'clock?
3:30
tomorrow. 3:30
tomorrow.
in this facility?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else from the council? Councilor Staggers.
Yes. There are a couple of items I'm going to pull from the consent calendar tonight. The first one's going to be dealing with the pedestrian bridge,
Okay.
I think we're all familiar with, and then also the City Hall computer room air conditioner. So
The second one, I'm sorry?
the City Hall computer room air conditioner.
Okay.
That's the $145,834 one.
Okay. We'll be ready to discuss those this evening then. Okay. Any other items? All righty, then we'll move into our presentation. Our first presentation will be from Kendra Simmonsma, Special Projects Manager. She's going to be talking about our top 10 projects in the city right now.
Good afternoon, Council. Very happy to be here. Kendra Simmonsma, Special Projects Manager for the city. Thank you for your time, and I know with the full agenda we'll get started right away. The top 10 list for projects has been around since I've been here with the city for over 2.5 years, and so this is just an update on where we're at with our top 10 list. Hopefully there's nothing on here that really surprises any of you. But you can see here's our current top 10 list. 3 of the projects you can see are highlighted as new, and we'll talk about that today. But that begs the question about what has come off the list. So let's talk about those. The completed initiatives that have come off our project list is, the first one is pension plan, and that was led from our HR team, Bill O'Toole, and the project manager was Angie Youthy. And you all remember what this project was about changes to our pension plan, that ultimately the estimated savings over the next 30 years is $300 million. And so what I wanted to highlight here is that starting this past July, new employees with the city are no longer enrolled in a city retirement system, but they're on the state retirement system. And then beginning in January 1 of next year, the health plan is no longer available for retirees, new retirees from the city. And again, those two items implemented together have a projected actuarial savings of $300 million. So those are very important deliverables from this project, and I just wanted to highlight that. Another initiative that we are taking off our top 10 list because it's completed, successfully completed, is the Prairie West Library That, of course, was led from our library team, Director Mary Johns, and the project manager was from our engineering team, Dina Knutson. It completed on time and within budget, and all of you, I'm sure, remember the ribbon cutting that was held this past August, and there's just some photos of that event. The River Greenway is the third initiative that we're highlighting, and it is no longer on our top 10 list because of the Phase 2 completion. And if you remember, we were actually having the River Greenway project on the top 10 for Phase 1 and for Phase 2. Phase 1 completed last year, Phase 2 has completed this year, or at least is substantially completed. There was ribbon cutting back in September, and they are working on final punch list items that are on schedule to be completed by the year end. And so here are just some highlighted pictures of the Riverfest activity that happened earlier this summer, and then also just one of the features of the walkway down to the river. So with those initiatives being completed and off the list, we have space for 3 new initiatives that we're adding, and they are the Citizen Boards Review, the City Hall renovation effort, and then a subdivision annexation initiative. And I'll talk through each of them briefly as we move forward here. The Citizen Boards Review. So I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but we have actually over 40 citizen boards that the city continues to ask for applications for, and you serve on a term, and all of those boards are governed by many different ways, by ordinance, by resolution, by state statute, by code, by a combination of all of those things. And so the purpose of this objective for this project is to really review the board bylaws and the things that are governing those boards and figure out if there's a more consistent way that we can support and manage those things moving forward. And so the team right now, we're just starting in planning activities. The team right now is meeting with each of the board liaisons. There's a board liaison for every citizen board. And we're going to talk to them about their current processes and see what we can do to improve and make the administration of those 40-some boards more efficient. This is being sponsored out of our legal team. Dave Fifley is a sponsor, and I have the privilege to be the project manager for this activity. The next new initiative is the City Hall renovation project, and the objective and focus of this initiative is really to improve overall customer service to our citizens and also to maximize employee collaboration within City Hall and within the departments. The main objectives that you'll start to see with this project is that we're going to actually renovate the planning and building services area to improve the overall customer service. Planning and building services are one of our highest traffic when it comes to our citizens that come in and do building permits and do interactions with our planning team. And so that's a really important place that we think that we can improve on a customer experience there. And then the other objective or focus for this project is our engineering space, and to see if we can increase overall team collaboration, and so that space will also be looked at in the renovation effort. This is being sponsored out of our central services team. Sue Quambeck-Etten is leading the effort, and we have 2 project managers, one from our public works team, Aaron Bofenkamp, and one from our engineering team, Lance Weatherly. Our last addition to the top 10 list is a subdivision annexation project. And really the purpose of this project is to develop a consistent process that helps us ensure orderly city growth. We currently just initiated this effort. There are planning activities going on right now to determine the scope of what areas that we'll be looking at. This is being jointly sponsored out of Planning and Building Services and Public Works, and so the directors are Mike Cooper and Mark Cotter, and Deborah Kayakowski from our planning office is holding the project manager role. All 3 of these initiatives are just in the planning stage, and as more planning continues, we'll be able to provide more of an update on the target deliverable dates and where we're progressing. And so what I want to do for the rest of my update here is just to briefly run through where we're at with the other 7 projects. Just a reminder, these are just listed in alphabetical order. All of them are very important, but we're just going to start numeric first and then go down. The 2025 downtown plan, that's been on our top 10 project list now for about a year. Activity really started earlier this year. The intent of the 2025 plan, if I can just remind everyone, is that it's to build upon the 2015 plan. And one of the goals of that project is really to engage the community and many citizens as a whole to help with their ideas, to capture their ideas, and to really make it a community plan. And so right now, what has happened is that we've actually established a citizen advisory committee. We're also doing we would also like to do a market analysis of downtown to actually use that as input into the 2025 plan. And so an RFP is currently in process, and we are reviewing proposals now. And then also what's happening is that they've actually opened up applications online for citizen work groups. We're inviting citizens to be part of the process outside of just being on an advisory committee, but being part of a work group, and you can go out to the project website and submit your application and be organized into a work group. The 2025 project is being led jointly out of Community Development, Darren Smith, and Planning, which is Mike Cooper. The project manager is Dustin Power. The next project update is the Aquatic Facility Project. All of you will remember that the project completed an aquatic facility master plan that was actually presented to this body. And also additionally, that project is working on developing conceptual designs for an indoor and an outdoor facility at Spellerbrick Park location. And this is in support of educating the citizens for the upcoming election in April. This initiative is being led out of our parks team with Don Kearney as the sponsor, and Tori Miedema is the project manager. You all are very familiar with me and the Event Center. We get the opportunity to come to this body every other month. Our next update is this month, at the end of this month. Just to say again, sponsorship sales are continuing. Our building is scheduled to be enclosed by the end of this year. Things are going well. Of course, I would say that. I'm the project manager. The next two items on our list are software initiatives. They are both they're tied together because it's software, but it's also ways that we are going to improve the way we work in City Hall, and ultimately we'll have better information and better ways that we can communicate to the customers and the citizens of the city. The financial management project is on track. It's completing its final testing phase. We're actually focusing on end user training this month and next month, with an implementation of the purchasing, the payroll, and a financial systems going live, and we're using starting in January of 2014. So it's a really big deal. The project's going really well. Tracy Turback and Tom Huber from Finance have been leading that initiative, and we're really excited that not only will we be in a position where we'll get better way for the systems to all talk to each other so we can get better information, but it'll improve the overall interaction between departments and then ultimately to our citizens. The other software initiative that we're continuing to work on is land management integration, and again, that's a software product that helps us manage all the land and the development of the land. Our system configuration was completed this past October. We are in process of additional report development. And in a nutshell, I will say that report development is anything that the system has to produce. And so whether it's a platting fee invoice or an actual report that we make and do some analysis from, we're currently developing those reports. And initial testing has started. So that project is moving along as planned. We do have a target implementation date to be early next year. The land management project I should mention is being co-sponsored out of our planning department with Kevin Smith, and engineering with Chad Heavey. Our project manager for that is Deborah Gajkowski. Our next project on our list, a brief update, is the LiveWell Initiative. That's being chaired out of our health department with Jill Franken, and Alicia Calera is our project manager. I just wanted to highlight the accomplishments that LiveWell has achieved this last year. They've implemented a tobacco-free youth recreation policy, and I know that Alicia will be coming up later in this meeting to give you an update on that. They've also held 2 community summits, and with the Big Squeeze initiative, they were able to reach over 8,000 of our residents to educate and do blood pressure screenings. So they really are continuing to make significant strides in the community with partnerships and continuing our community to be in a more healthy living. The scope has just been approved for 2014 for LiveWell Sioux Falls and what they're going to focus on in 2014. One of the major initiatives is to actually review all the plans and assessments that the city has in place right now and how they impact health, and to review them and then make a recommendation on what implementation steps should be done in accordance with supporting healthy lifestyles, healthy living. They're also going to do a complete street analysis, and complete streets, if you remember, Mark Fenton came as one of the community summits and talked about complete streets and talked about how it would be important not only to provide efficient vehicular movement on streets, but also pedestrian and bicycle, and to provide a way for everyone to function on a complete street. And so what this initiative is for 14 is that the health department will be engaging business and community leaders and this body to continue that conversation. And then also, they'll just be doing multiple activities in 2014 to continue to promote active living. Then the last project, just because it's in alphabetical order, is our rail yard redevelopment project, which made significant milestones this past year. Significant of note, in September, they were able to complete an environmental assessment, and the selective alternative was determined, which would require no new switch yard. You all know this. We've talked about this. I haven't talked about it, but Mark Cotter and Josh Peterson has been on top of this project from the beginning. The important thing to note about this alternative is that it reduces the required construction and overall cost for this alternative, which is really good news. One of the key things just to communicate as upcoming milestones for this initiative is that we have to do an appraisal of the land now because there's an agreement that we'd want to sell. And so the land appraisal is due back in January with a purchase agreement scheduled for March of 14. And then the construction of the new track and removal of the existing tracks would be done in 14 and 15. So this little big picture milestones, upcoming milestones, and I'm sure as this project moves forward that there'll be more in-depth updates from the project team. As always, these projects, all of these updates are submitted on a monthly basis by the project managers. They are found internally. There's an internal website that everyone has access to if you're a city employee or city staff or the council. And also the same update is provided on our siouxfalls.org so that citizens can see the updates as well. And again, they are updated on a monthly basis. The first week of the month is when they're updated. So with that, all of the project managers of each of these initiatives are here. I am here and ready to stand by for any questions.
Okay, any questions for Kendra? Councilor Staggers.
Yes. Kendra, you mentioned about the citizen board's review.
Yes.
And you also used the word efficiency, create more efficiency.
Yes.
I totally agree with you on that. Is part of creating more efficiency reducing the number of boards? I mean, 40 seems like we have a tremendous number of boards here in Sioux Falls.
So it's not an identified objective, but certainly we would look at if there's redundancies or if there's some boards are doing the same things, we would look at that. But it's not an identified objective at this point, Councilor.
Okay. And when do you plan to have this completed?
We're just in the middle of planning and evaluating the amount of work that we have. We want to meet with each of the board liaisons to understand their processes and how they work as a board. And once we finish gathering that information, I'll be able to come back and give an update on how much time it will take us to get through it.
Okay. And also, one other quick question. In your presentation on the rail yard redevelopment, you mentioned on one of the slides saying reduced required costs. And so does that mean we're going to spend less than $35 million?
I'm going to actually ask either Josh Peterson or Mark Cotter to come up to address that question, Councilor.
Good afternoon, Councilor. Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. Essentially, there was just with a series of alternatives that in some cases ranged upwards of $80 million. It's been the project team's goal, and certainly with the current alternative in front of us, that our job is to deliver this project for at or under what's left with the current funding. And so I would say that certainly with that statement, reducing construction costs and project costs, that's what we're after, is that we've actually settled on an alternative that is far less than what we've been talking about in the legacy ideas for many years.
Sure. And if I could just follow up one more question. My understanding at this point in time is that when it comes to city tax money, the only city tax money that's being obligated is for the fence. Is that true?
In relationship to this project?
Yes.
No, some years back, and I would go back, I think in potentially 2009, there was just under $400,000 that in sales tax that was authorized for this project. And so a combination of the federal dollars and that sales tax authorization is what we've been managing the project with.
Okay. And once again, though, we are going to use city tax money for that fence?
That is, at this point in time, not a qualifying expense with federal dollars, but we're still working on that, because we do think just with the expected development and having mixed-use development next to an industrial activity, if it's possible, that's one of the tasks that Josh and I are working through, that if we can justify for that to qualify, we think that we personally think it's a justified expense. We just have some work to do with the agencies.
And just one final question.
All right.
Sure.
Okay. How much is that fence supposed to cost? I don't think I've ever heard any figures.
I don't have that number for you, but we can certainly follow up on that.
Okay, thank
And
you.
what we would expect that. I know in the memorandum of understanding we actually established the height, and so I can certainly have Josh reach out to a fencing company and get you what a per foot cost would be.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cotter. Any other questions for Kendra regarding our top 10 projects? Would anybody like to see more detail on any of these projects? All righty. Thank you, Kendra. Appreciate it. Very good job. Our second item for today is our legislative priority discussion. Mr. Jim David, our Legislative and Operations Manager, will be presenting on this. I believe we all have handouts on these.
Good afternoon, Council. Jim David, City Council staff. Before you this afternoon is a draft list of the legislative priorities. Staff is requesting that a consensus or a general consensus be reached this afternoon in order to allow us to go back and to put this in a resolution for your consideration, hopefully by November 19th. But I wanted to start the presentation this evening or this afternoon again with just a little bit of the successes that occurred during the last legislative session. Here's just three of them. The South Dakota retirement system, Kendra discussed that briefly, and this just allowed Sioux Falls employees to be a part of the South Dakota retirement system. Wastewater regionalization, this allowed what was, and of course Mark is here, but for customers to pay for past and future capital costs for new capacity. And the half-cent tourism tax, this is levied against hotels, spectator events, and visitor attractions, and it funds tourism promotion. Previously, this had been set to sunset, but this legislation made it permanent, and each of you endorsed that change. The first item that we'll discuss tonight is a carryover from the previous legislative priorities. And this item opposes any legislation that would inhibit municipalities from providing services requested by citizens. This is really defensive language. It is intended to allow for the city to continue to operate with the flexibility under home rule. The second item is one that was decided after a meeting that was many of you had participated in, and it was put on by the South Dakota Municipal League and members from the Department of Revenue. And following that meeting, the council decided to expand the number of months that more than 2 violations can occur from 24 to 36. According to statute, no retail license may be revoked or suspended if the licensee has not had more than 2 underage violations in 24 months. This priority, of course, was a reaction to consistent alcohol violations by just some retail establishments. but by increasing the number of months to 36 months would expand the net, so to speak, to include additional months that that establishment could be suspended or could be revoked by the Department of Revenue. The third item actually gives expands the weapons or the firearms prohibition to municipality or buildings that the governing body operates under. Right now, weapons are prohibited in courthouses. They're prohibited in the state capitol, but the municipal buildings that each of you meet in is exempted. And this would simply give the municipality the flexibility to institute a similar ban within their building, within where the governing body meets, but also the offices of the city. Number 4, this is a new item, and this would just restrict a carrier license to limousines and party buses and prohibit alcohol on taxi cabs. And the 5th item, this would just recommend that the legislature support a statewide ban on texting throughout the state. So. And then finally, if we look at the legislative schedule, I talked to Vice Chair Karski on this. Right now, the legislative priorities are approved by each of you. Typically in November, I look back in previous council meetings, and before that, in 2001, they were approved in either January or February. In 2000, it was January or February. What staff is recommending is, due to the South Dakota Municipal League annual meeting in August, that a preliminary list or a preliminary resolution adopting legislative priorities occur in June or May or July, just before the August policy committee meetings. And so staff and each of you and members of the administration, when they go to these policy committee meetings, they'll actually have items that they can present forward for consideration by the Municipal League. Be happy to entertain any questions that you may have on any of these items.
And if I could add to what Jim had we were discussing yesterday, the South Dakota Municipal League, to which we belong, has voted on their legislative priorities as an organization already. They did that at their meeting in October, which I think you were at, Councilor Jameson. And here we are just presenting our legislative priorities, and my feeling is that we should try to be speaking as one voice with the Municipal League. I mean, we may have different ideas on what we want for Sioux Falls as far as legislative priorities, but I think a lot of these are very broad that the rest of the municipalities. And if we have some ideas that we could take to them and get assistance with getting passed, I think right now we're a year behind. So just the idea of being able to bring it to the council and discuss our legislative priorities before instead of after the fact, at least we can bring something to the table at the South Dakota Municipal League meetings. So, any discussion, questions? Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you. And Jim can help me with this, but there are at least 2 of these that mirror Municipal League policies now. Number 1 is taken almost word for word from the Municipal League policy. It's not one that we're ever going to count as a success. As Jim said, it's defensive language. It's us taking the stand for local control, and it's always on the Municipal League list. It's always on our list. Number 5, the encouraging the statewide texting ban is also one that is mirrored in the Municipal League policies. They call it distracted driving, but there is support for that to happen statewide. So we have done that to a certain extent, and then the others, the Municipal League has. Number 3, the firearms ban in municipal buildings, we've talked about it, but I'm not sure that it's on their list right now.
It was never added to their list. It was discussed. The thought was by the Municipal League that the likelihood of it being approved by the legislature was fairly small, so they decided against moving forward on that particular item.
Right, and it was a trade-off. It was a political trade-off. There was something else that Municipal League needed more than that, and that happens, but. And my other piece of this then is that this stuff takes time, and sometimes we have to keep it on our list for a while and keep bugging people and keep working it. So I personally like the list and would vote for it if we were voting, but would approve it.
When would this come before the council for resolution? Do we have a date on this?
November 19th.
November, in 2 weeks.
Yep.
Okay. In the meantime, if somebody would like to see this list modified or basically make a motion to amend it at the resolution time would be the time to do that. Other discussion? All righty.
Thank you.
Next agenda item, city parking fees and fine overview. We are going to be having one of our items tonight, I believe, is going to be on parking fines and appeals process, et cetera. So I asked for more information, kind of a background, history, how many we're looking at, et cetera, et cetera. So,
yes, thank you. Darren Smith, Director of Community Development and Public Parking, and Matt Nelson, our Public Parking Manager, is with me as well. Yes, just very briefly, Councilor Karski asked us to provide a bit more information on this process and the ordinance that you have for second reading tonight, which does amend the appeals process. So I'm just going to jump right into to this. One thing I wanted to start with is just one slide on how did we get here? You know, why are we addressing this? And wanted to make it clear that this was part of a larger citywide or city government-wide centralization or consolidation process of all appeals processes as a result of a Supreme Court ruling. And so I won't go into a lot of detail with that. Dave Feifley is much better in explaining that than I am. But I just want to make it clear that, you know, Matt and I didn't roll out of bed one day and think that we should, hey, let's put an appeal fee in place and overhaul this process. Part of a much larger process, and I think it's our fault for skipping over some of that to this point because this was kind of sailing through the process, and so in hindsight we would have provided a little more background, but we'll get a chance to do that today just briefly. So this as this portion of all that centralization effort was making its way through the process, the parking appeal process did get peeled away, so to speak. We asked if it could be put on the side and let code enforcement and other things go through because we were looking at a whole new software package that was going to change a number of things in our office with ticketing and appeals and all those things, and we wanted to see how that would play out. We had our makeover effort underway, so we asked if it could be put on the shelf temporarily and revisited later, and it was. We did bring this ordinance through the City Council's Public Services Committee for review and recommended approval in October last year. It was approved 4-0, and at that time with a $50 fee. Now, in fairness to the members of the committee, that ordinance did not scream out $50. It simply made reference to, again, the section or the area in ordinance that talks about all appeals and the $50 fee for all appeals, code enforcement and everything. Again, this uniform consolidation effort. And so, so in fairness to that committee, they did not see that right in front of them. They would have had to do a little digging to see that. We did not bring it to the council immediately after that, again, because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. We got around to bringing it back a few weeks ago, as you know, with the first reading. And very honestly, before we filed the paperwork to put it in front of the council as an ordinance, our team met with Dave Feifley and his team, and we looked at the $50 and we thought, you know, that really does seem excessive for the price of the tickets we have. So we did a little looking at the numbers and decided to cut it in half and go with $25. And I'm going to get to what those numbers are in just a moment. Before I do that, Councilor Karski asked me to remind everybody what those ticket levels are and the amounts, and I think that's good. So these are essentially the different types of tickets that we issue. The police department also issues some of these. The overtime parking, those are the ones most of us are familiar with, the $5 variety. Improper tickets are $15, prohibited parking tickets $15, and then snow alert are $35. And I also wanted to point out the courtesy warnings we issued last year. We issued about 6,000 over the last 12 months. We've issued about 6,000 courtesy tickets that total well over $30,000. Most of those are the $5 overtime tickets. So it's fair to point out when we got to the $25, I know a lot of, there was a lot of assumptions of, wow, that's 5 times the amount of a ticket someone would appeal. Well, it's 5 times the amount of a $5 ticket. The reality is we have tickets at a variety of levels. And then I'll show you a further reason is this. Over the most recent 12 months, there were approximately 250 parking citations appealed. And I'm going to jump down a couple bullet points. You can see about 38% of those are actually the $35 snow alert tickets. About 32% are the overtime, the $5 tickets, and then about 30% are the prohibiteds and impropers combined. So most of them are actually the $35 snow alert variety. And when you look at all those tickets combined that were appealed, the average citation appealed was $26.45. So that probably puts the $25 amount in a little better context in terms of where that came from. Just a couple things very quickly I'll touch on because that's a part of this as well. 21% of those who signed up to appeal failed to show because, again, we've had no fee in the past, and they would sign up to appeal. We would, of course, schedule an appeals hearing officer, an administrative hearing officer. We still have to pay them, whether somebody shows up or not. So we hire them, make them show up, or ask them to show up for the scheduled appeals, and then nobody shows up. They're not out anything. They just simply pay their ticket and go on, but we have to eat the cost of that. And then just the last one here, I know it's probably a common question or curious question, how many are upheld or dismissed? About 70% of those that are appealed are upheld. 30% are dismissed. Now, in the 70%, you should know that any time a ticket is reduced by the hearing officer, we still flag that in the upheld category. But that happens, somewhat frequently as well, where it's cut in half or something like that as a compromise. Now, tonight, my understanding is that we do have an amendment to set the fee at $5. And we're comfortable with that. We're supportive of that. We feel that accomplishes what we were hoping to just have the folks who want to file an appeal have a little bit of skin in the game and some incentive to show up. If they are successful with their appeal, obviously they don't pay the ticket, and they also get refunded that fee. So then they would pay nothing. If they lose, we would keep the fee, and then of course they would be asked to pay their citation as well. With that, are there any questions that Matt or I could answer?
Councilor Staggers.
Yes, Darren. I think you mentioned that in the past we didn't necessarily charge a fee for people to come. How long have we been charging for people to appeal?
We have not. We still are not.
Still not doing
That's
it right
correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep. Councilor Rolfing.
Darren, when you have this appeal board, do you schedule times for the people to come in 5-minute intervals, or how do you do that? Or do you just say at 3:30 we're going to start?
Yeah, we know about how many we can accomplish in typically a 1-hour time period. So the administrative hearing officers that we will have, and those were selected recently through an RFP process that the city attorney's office was responsible for. We know how many we can handle, and so we schedule accordingly. So, Matt, how many in an hour would it be? 6?
I think it's fair to note in the old process, the processes are changing. In the old processes, we could get up to 20. Sometimes we would have 1 in a session. It just depended on the time of the year. In the new process, we've got some other steps we need to take. We would go through the attorney's office. We would send out certified letters, letting them know when the hearing was. I see that number reducing. I would say maybe 1 every 10 minutes. I would say a max to probably 6 an hour. Plus, there's a lot of prep time that goes into that also.
Other questions? I have a couple if I could. How often does the appeal board meet?
Currently, it is approximately once a week, so there's a day set aside. Depending on the new process, we would allocate either 1 slot a week. Depending on the demand, we may have to increase that or decrease that, depending on the number of appeals.
What's in the budget? What is the cost of running this appeal board?
Currently, we pay $80 per session. Now it's kind of a varying schedule. The hearing officers that we would be going to have legal training. They're actually attorneys. They are at $125 an hour. So it's going to be slightly higher. Honestly, it's not a cost-driven thing for us. It's a consolidation-driven effort for us.
Okay.
Councilor Karski, if I remember right, and I don't have that right in front of me, I think in the last 12 months, we had 48 sessions scheduled, and that encompassed the 249 appeals that were scheduled. And in terms of what, going with the new folks that we've hired or contracted with through the RFP process, I'm estimating our cost just for them, if the same numbers repeat themselves, would be approximately $7,000. Now that, those are hard costs. That does not factor in Matt's time and staff time to prepare and because of the due process involved and all that sort of thing. But I think Matt's right. It's $7,000 in what is a $2 million annual budget. So this is not about recovering the cost of that. It's really about being more efficient with that process. We think we can reduce the cost if we have less appeals, but also, having some incentive for the folks to actually show up if they tell us they're going to.
Okay. Councilor Rolfe.
Yeah, Darren, again, you're doing that once a week approximately then, except for the weeks maybe that we have a holiday or something like that, and there's what it amounts to.
Yep.
Any way we can consolidate that in every other week, that kind of thing? Hopefully this is going to not stop, but control the amount of appeals we have. And it seemed to me that that's an awful, every 2 weeks would be plenty amount of time in between hearings.
Yeah, I mean, we can look at those things. I don't know.
Ordinance that we have to do that once a week?
I don't know. Yeah.
No. So
more by demand.
I was getting at before.
Yeah.
I mean, when you divide up what you just said, the 250 or so and 40, you got about five a time.
Right.
Yeah. 10 would be in an hour. You could do 10 in an hour a lot of times, and
yep.
Then you've got savings of the attorneys coming in half the amount of time.
Yes. Yeah.
Now,
No,
we're
we're
going to pay them for 40 sessions regardless of whether they're there or not.
Dave, do you recall in the RFP how that's?
Councilor Rolfing, what we are planning to do is exactly what you're suggesting. We have 2 different law-trained hearing examiners right now. We would have each of them coming in once per month, so it'd be every other week. And we're going to try that out first to see how demand is. And it should be added, too, that there's going to be some more internal effort to try and resolve these before they get to a hearing stage. But as far as costs, what we're hoping to do is that if there's a session scheduled and there's no shows, we'd pay probably like $25 for that lawyer to come in and sit there for a while. Obviously, they're taking their time driving down.
You do that. Yeah.
And they're going to probably wait 20, 30 minutes to make sure no one shows up, and then another 10, 15 minutes. So that's a really good rate for a law-trained person, and they're willing to do that, and we'll have to amend their contracts. But, yeah, the 125 rate is not far off from what the non-law-trained hearing examiners are being paid now. So we think certainly with what the Supreme Court has dictated that we do, and that we do have law-trained persons hearing these appeals, this should make it consolidate with due process.
Thank you.
I have one more question. No personal experience other than observing that these tickets have been issued. It's in our city parks, like Dunham Park, during softball games. People park because of limited parking. They may be parking on the grass, that type of thing. It's a fairly hefty ticket, but I don't see that one mentioned. Is that one governed by you, or is that
No, I think that's the police department.
That's the police department.
Right?
Correct. They are issued by police. We manage that process. So when the ticket comes in, we still manage it. And a lot of times we will refer back to parks on the validity of tickets and why they're issued. But yes, we oversee the other end of it, yeah.
And that one can be appealed also then? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Other questions? All righty. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your time. Next on our agenda, tobacco-free youth recreation policy. Alicia?
Hi. Good evening. I'm Alicia Klura, Assistant Director of Public Health. And you'll remember in June, the Parks Department, Health Department, Police Department gave a full presentation on a new tobacco policy initiative to the Public Services Committee. And at that time, we said that we would come back towards the end of the season or the end of the year and just let you know how the season went. As a part of the agenda item, a stat sheet was submitted, so that I hope that you've had a chance to review that. Just as a brief background, when we began this initiative, we did look at data, a community assessment, and a community survey, and identified that there was a need for increased tobacco policy within our community. So knowing that tobacco and smoking is still the #1 cause of preventable death, and knowing if we could prevent people from smoking before the age of 21, then there's almost no chance that they will start smoking, we decided to take a youth prevention approach. And so in the spring, a parks policy was implemented to discourage the use of tobacco products on playgrounds or areas of youth recreation. You can see from the sheet that we submitted, one of the ways that we measure success in public health is reach. So how many people are getting the message about the policy, but not only the policy, but access to the quit line, should that be something that they desire, or just education on why these things are important. And you can see that we used many methods to deploy our message. PSAs, flyers, signage is a very important one. And the CDC gives us a tool that allows us to actually measure our reach. And with our tobacco initiative alone, we had over 1 million media impressions that happened within the community. Another measure of success we look at in public health is, are our initiatives actually spurring any action or response? And we were happy to see that from the summer of 2013 back compared to the summer of 2012, we did see an increase in calls to the South Dakota Quit Line. Now, certainly, there are many factors that influence calls to the Quit Line. They themselves do a wonderful job as far as promotion. The CDC had a huge campaign this last year. All of those are influencers. But we have partnered a great deal with the state, and we hope and we're optimistic that our efforts in Sioux Falls are helping increase those upticks in quit line usage. The enforcement of the policy has been through education, self and community policing. We recently met with the police department, and they were very positive about how the summer went. They didn't have any negative interactions with citizens. They successfully distributed the kippy packs, which is how people can extinguish their smoking materials and also get access to quit line information if they're interested. They really were just didn't verbalize any barriers to being able to have those interactions with citizens and gain compliance with the policy. A final measure of success that we look at is how was this received in the community. And the parks, police, or health department, we have not had any complaints or concerns given to us, formally or informally, from the citizens in Sioux Falls about how this policy was deployed in the community or about the enforcement efforts that are occurring. The citizens seem to have a real understanding that there is a public health risk to smoking, especially when it's around children, and children are exposed to those behaviors, and that there's a benefit to reducing that as much as possible. So overall, from our perspective, it was a successful rollout of this. We're very grateful to the Parks and Recreation Department as well as the Police Department for their willingness to partner on this. And with that, I would say that there are several of us here that would be happy to answer any questions on how this has gone.
Questions? Councilor Jameson.
Alicia, I apologize. I don't have that sheet that you're referring to.
Oh, you don't?
If you have copies.
I submitted to Sire. And
maybe it's emailed.
Sire.
It's on Sire, but.
It's on Sire, but I can grab one off the table for you.
Do that. You answer the questions.
What's that? Did he say? Okay.
Other questions? Councilor Erpenbach.
Just, and I know you said this, but we sometimes get caught up in compliance.
Mm-hmm.
No tickets were issued.
No.
How do we know we're successful if we haven't written any tickets? Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, we feel some of the things that I talked about help measure success, the reach of the message, the uptick in quit line calls, and when the police, from what has been shared with me, have approached people about the policy, what they have said is that primarily it's people who may not know about it. And once They understand the policy from being educated. There's no issue with compliance. No one has said that they wouldn't or did not want to comply. Sometimes it's people from out of town that the police are interacting with. So that's, I'm not sure what you're asking.
No, I just think that's incredible, and I just think we have to understand that sometimes compliance isn't about, whether we wrote tickets or whether we, did whatever. Compliance really is about people get it, people understand it, and they had a positive interaction with the police officer, and that was the end of the conversation, and the smoking stopped around a youth activity. I think that's a huge point for all of us to understand, and I just appreciate you bringing that forward.
Thank you.
Councilor Staggers?
Yes, a number of years ago, the City Council voted to ban smoking out at the arena and in that complex. Here, the City Council is ignored. We have the Health Department, we have the Parks Department instituting this policy. Why isn't the City Council voting to deal with this issue instead of the Health and Parks Department?
Well, we've been asked that a couple of times, and we've really answered to the best of our ability why policy was chosen rather than ordinance from our perspective. That was a major focus of our presentation in June. And in looking at the ordinances, there is an ordinance 93.025, I think, 95.032 that does provide the authority to the Parks Director to implement policy so long as there is signage. And that's what, when we looked at our partnership with Parks and the Police Department, that's just something that we talked about together. The ordinance portion, or the City Council deciding to bring an ordinance forward, is still an option for the council.
But now we have policy that's not really enforceable, don't we? I mean, there's no fine or anything for people smoking outside in the parks.
There's no what for them?
There's no fine or anything for people smoking out in the parks.
The police department has not had an interaction with a citizen that would create a need for a fine. If they've been asked to not do that activity, then they stop. And so there hasn't been any interaction that would cause the need for that at this time.
Because there's nothing to enforce it, right?
Well, outside of, this venue, we know that for tobacco policy, one of the biggest enforcement methodologies used nationwide, not just with this policy, is signage. And that by far and away, signage is the most effective way to enforce policy around tobacco use, and the vast majority of people respect it. You see it inside. We have new indoor policies throughout the state, and it's just the most used and highly effective policy enforcement piece that's used with tobacco.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Councilor Rolfing.
I think what Councilor Staggers was asking for is there a fine if somebody says, no, I'm not going to quit smoking, and he's issued a citation?
Yeah, I think that's a Director Kearney question.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I might just take us back to how we got to creating the policy that we did. If you remember when we had a challenge with the individual that decided that he wanted to continue to consume alcohol during a youth event over at Sherman Park, and we felt like it was important for us to be able to not allow that. And so there is a section in city ordinance that allows the director to establish policy as long as it's signed. And as a reminder, this also went through the Parks and Recreation Board. And we felt like that was a very effective means of being able to sign those youth sports locations and facilities to restrict that. And we put the signs up saying alcohol is not permitted during youth activities. And so we just took that same approach with the tobacco use, and that's how we got here. The other thing I'd tell you is that we specifically have asked that question of the police department, that if somebody was refusing to quit using tobacco during a youth activity, they would cite that person for that offense. So it is enforceable.
What are they cited for? I mean, there's no ordinance that prohibits that. I mean, are they fined $100, $50, taken to jail? What?
Yeah, I could follow up with that with you through the police department.
Because previously
certainly
we've
can do
been
that.
told there's no enforcement. You just ask the people not to do it, and if they keep doing it, there's nothing to enforce.
Well, it would be against city ordinance at that point because we have signed it that it's prohibited, just like any other rule or regulation.
Yeah. I mean, anybody can put a sign up. I mean,
And maybe an email to the councilors,
Sure.
letting them know what that would be. I guess when I see this, one thing that speaks highly to the effectiveness of what we've done here is 200-plus Kippy packs were distributed by police officers. To me, that means that they went up to 200 people with those things and said, smoking's not permitted in the park, sir. Here's a way, or ma'am, to extinguish your cigarette. Please refrain from doing it. So at least 200 times people were asked, from what I see, to not smoke in the park at that point. So, other questions, comments, Councilor Staggs?
the only problem is this city council wasn't asked about this. That's the
we
problem.
were. We gave that authority to the city parks department, parks director, when it came before us a little over or about a year ago, I think, and it was kind of like the parking ordinance, where to the Public Services Committee, we missed it. So if we want to fix that, that would be up to us. Councilor?
I guess I would argue just that this item has been an ordinance since 1993. I mean, Alicia cited the ordinance. It's a 93 ordinance that the council gave the parks director the ability to sign parks to enforce policies, including no alcohol in youth events and including no smoking at youth events and around playgrounds. Those are covered by that ordinance that came from this city council in 1993.
Yes.
1992. It was passed in 92.
92 is the date on the ordinance.
If we, and I said this before in this conversation, that if council wants to take back that control if we want to micromanage parks to that extent, we absolutely can change that ordinance. That's what we're about. We get to set ordinances, but we've given that power to the Parks Department director.
Councilor Anderson.
I do agree with Councilor Erfenbach on that also. And the other thing on this was each time that the Parks Department has decided to use signage as a deterrent, they have come to the council, made a full presentation. When there was questions, it did go to a committee, and we did have the opportunity to look at it and change it if we wanted to. So, as Councilor Erfenbach said, if we want to change this and take that ability back, we can, but at this point in time, as long as we're informed before those policies are put in place, and we have the ability to say yes or no, then I think it's working.
Okay. Other input? Councilor Jameson.
I would have to say as well, the process isn't as pure as we might be accustomed to in other things, but the review process getting there does still come through this, so it may not be as other things are done, but it is done with review of the council, and we do participate, so I think it's fairly done.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, everybody. That brings us to the end of our agenda. We're going to need 10 minutes to prepare for our fiscal committee meeting, which will be held next, so we'll just call it 5:18. Meeting adjourned.